Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as you shall answer unto God? Please be seated. The state may examine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Okay. I hope we won't have this problem with you, but the acoustics in here are not really great. That microphone amplifies your voice so that you don't have to shout. But if you can just kind of be mindful to make sure you're speaking close to the microphone, that would be helpful today, okay?
Okay.
First of all, can you tell us your name?
Kendra Rhoden.
Okay. And Kendra, can you tell us how old you are?
25.
Okay. And where do you work?
I currently work as a nurse at Brookdale. It's a nursing facility for dementia residents.
Okay. And where is that located?
In Inglewood, Ohio.
Okay. How long have you worked there?
For a little under 3 years.
Okay. Do you also have a child?
Yes, she's 4.
Are you nervous about testifying today?
A little bit.
Okay. All right. Can you tell us who your parents are?
My mother is Stacy Rigsby. My father is Kenneth Rhoden.
And do you have any sisters or brothers?
I have an older sister, Tajana Ennis. A brother, Austin Rhoden. He's older. He's passed away. And my brother, Luke Rhoden, who is also older than me.
Also older than you?
Yes.
So you're the baby?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And can you tell us, where did you live growing up?
I lived at 70 Miller's Lane in Waverly with my mother and my father until they divorced.
Okay. And do you recall approximately how old you were when they divorced?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Elementary school, middle school, high school?
Probably about middle school.
Okay. And when they divorced, did you guys remain at the Miller's Lane address, or what? Tell me about that.
I remained at Miller's Lane with my mother, and my father had moved to my grandfather's house on Union Hill Road.
Okay. And tell us where that was on Union Hill Road.
It was next to Chris's house. There was a garden in between the two houses.
Okay. So, and can you describe that house, what color it was?
It was a yellow house, a small yellow house.
Okay. So if you were facing Chris's residence, would it be to the left or to the right?
It would be on the left.
Okay. And you said it was your grandfather's house. Was he alive at that time, or had he passed?
He was alive at the time.
Okay. And can you tell us if your parents maintained a good relationship?
They did. They remained a friendship.
Okay. And can you tell us, as far as your father goes, was he involved in your life and that of your siblings?
Yes, actively.
Okay. So tell me, what does that mean?
I went over to his house frequently, especially with Hannah. I would stay there sometimes for weeks, and then I would go back to my mom's house. My dad would sometimes pick me up on his motorcycle, and we would go for rides. He'd take us out to get something to eat, me and my brother. My sister was a little bit older at the time. And he would take us over to the park in Chillicothe to feed the swans or geese or whatever.
Okay. And as you got older, did he also support any endeavors that you were undertaking?
Yes, he was trying to support me through a nursing career that I was trying to pursue at the time.
Okay. And tell me, how was he helping you in that regard?
He was going to help pay, so I wouldn't have to take out loans.
Okay. And in relation to when he was killed, what was that time frame as far as him helping you with the nursing?
He had saved back $12,000 to help pay for it.
And you obviously got your nursing degree.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you also help your brother and sister
Yes.
in a similar way?
Yes.
Okay. How often, on a weekly basis, would you say you saw your father, or monthly basis, weekly?
Typically, at least about once a week.
Okay. And you mentioned Hannah. Who are you talking about when you say Hannah?
Hannah Rhoden, she was Chris's daughter. She was my cousin, my best friend. We were like sisters.
Okay. And can you tell us for how long of your life that was? Did that start in early childhood, or did that start later in life?
Early childhood. We were only a month apart, so we had been together forever.
And you indicated that sometimes you would go and stay with your dad for weeks. Would you stay with your dad? Would you sometimes stay where Hannah was? Or just tell me about that.
Sometimes Hannah and I would stay with my father at my grandfather's house, or we would stay at Chris's or Dina's house, but always within that vicinity.
Say it again.
Always within that vicinity.
Okay. Had lots of sleepovers.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'd like to take you first to, well, when you guys were older, I guess, when you and Hannah became a little bit older, I guess, did you become aware that she had started a relationship with Jake Wagner?
Yes, she had informed me of that.
Okay.
Judge, could the witness keep her voice up a little bit? There's some noise outside that's...
Yeah, I know, we're having some competition, some kind of machine out there. If you could keep your voice up, it'd be helpful.
You got it.
Thank you.
Okay. So, can you tell us, did you yourself meet Jake Wagner?
Yes, I had met Jake on multiple different occasions.
Okay. And do you recall approximately how old you guys were, since you're only a month apart, when she first started seeing Jake?
We were around 13.
And were you with her when she first met him, or did you meet him after she had already started seeing him?
I had met him after.
Okay. And do you recall where you met him or what the circumstances were?
I had met Jake whenever Jake, George, and Billy Wagner had all come to Chris's house to help Chris with something. I'm not sure exactly what, though.
Okay. So you basically met all three of them at the same time, or had you met any of those individuals before that?
Not prior to that.
Okay. And did you spend some time with Jake and Hannah on various occasions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what kinds of things would you do, or what kinds of occasions can you remember?
We went to the Scioto County Fair. We went to the Raritan Whitetail Festival. And then we hung out at Bethel, I think Bethel Hill is the name of it. One of the residents that was part of the Wagners family.
Okay. And when you say the Wagner family, can you tell us who lived there?
Billy Wagner, Angela Wagner, George Wagner, and Jake Wagner.
And when you say you hung out there, like what would you do when you would hang out there?
I would mostly try to spend time with Hannah. She was trying to get me to know Jake and try to get me to know George.
She was trying to get you to like George?
Yes.
Okay. Would follow you everywhere she went.
An example would be when we went to the Raritan Whitetail Deer Festival. Hannah would need to go to the bathroom, or we would say that we were going to go to the bathroom, and Jake had to tag along, and then he would wait outside until we were done.
And did anything happen at I believe you said the Scioto County Fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
At the Scioto County Fair, Jake had made a demeaning remark to Kendra Rhoden and grabbed her by the arm, in which I turned and kicked him in the shin because I didn't like it, and then Hannah got in between the both of us.
You said he got between the both of you?
Hannah had gotten between
Oh.
Jake and I.
Okay. And at this time, were you still around age 13 or?
We would have probably been closer to 14 at the time.
Okay. Hannah had not yet had Sophia, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So when you expressed that you did not care for Jake, what was Hannah's reaction, or what ended up happening?
Hannah thought I just needed to get to know him better. Jake kind of didn't want Hannah to be around me, though.
Did you continue to hang out with them?
Not very frequently at that point.
Okay.
Jake kind of separated us a little bit.
And can you tell us, was there a time that, well, first of all, Hannah then ends up pregnant with Sophia, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell me about that.
She had come to me. She had arranged a little day for us to be together, and we had went to a man-made pond that my family had built out on Left Fork Road. We were swimming and fishing in the pond there. When she stopped and she told me that she was pregnant, I thought she was joking. I was hoping she was joking. But she told me she was really pregnant with his child and that everything was going to be okay.
Did you support her through that process?
As much as I could. I wasn't allowed to be around.
And when you say you weren't allowed, by whom?
By Jake Wagner.
After Hannah had Sophia, can you tell us where she lived?
She lived with Jake Wagner.
Okay. And where did she live?
I believe it was on Peterson Road.
Okay. Do you know if she lived on Bethel Hill Road for any length of time?
I'm not sure if she lived there. I know she had stayed there for long periods of time.
Okay. And can you tell us, was there a point where you became aware that that residence burned down at Bethel Hill?
Yes, ma'am. Hannah had informed me that it had burned down.
Did you ever visit Hannah up at Peterson Road address?
No.
At some point, did Hannah end up leaving Jake Wagner?
Yes, ma'am.
And what do you remember from that?
The night that she had left Jake, she came to my mother's residency where I was staying at, 70 Millers Lane, and she was a little distraught. We lied in my bed, and she had played audio recordings from Jake Wagner, phone calls that they had had, or from when they were in person. There were multiple different ones about incidents that had occurred between Jake and her.
Okay. And do you know what occurred between them?
Yes, ma'am. She not only told me, but had played audio recordings of Jake admitting to hitting her, choking her, pushing her against a wall.
Okay. And in those recordings, first of all, were they like voice messages, or was it actually like she had recorded that?
They were actual voice recordings.
Okay. And when he was admitting to that stuff, what was the tenor of those, or the tone of those recordings? Was he saying other things to her, for instance?
Objection on this judge.
Yeah, council want to approach it in just a minute. The court will sustain the objection to the form of the question.
Ms. Rhoden, if I could just ask you, at the point that Hannah left Jake, had she already had Sophia?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall approximately when this would have been?
I can't recall a specific time that it would have been. I don't know how old Sophia was at the time.
Okay. And you indicated that when she came to you, she was distraught. Like she came to your home.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct. And were you also able to observe any marks or bruises on her at that time?
Yes, ma'am. There was a mark under her chin. I'm not sure exactly what side. It was corresponding with the scar that was under her chin.
Could the witness speak up?
I'm sorry. There was a mark underneath her chin.
Thank you.
I can't say exactly what side, but it was on the side corresponding with her scar that was also under her chin.
Okay. So the scar obviously not being a new injury, but there was
Correct.
what appeared to be a fresh.
A fresh mark by it, yes.
Okay. And you'd indicated that he had said that he had choked her and hit her and pushed her against a wall.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And was that injury consistent with what was described?
Yes, ma'am.
The things he had done to her. And after that point, when she came to you and told you those things, did she ever return to him?
No, she never went back to dating or anything like that.
Okay. Never went back and stayed with him or moved back in with him?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Were there other times when you were present for conversations between Jake and Hanna regarding the relationship and her being able to parent if she leaves
Yes.
the Wagner residence?
There was an incident where Hannah was actually on the phone with Jake Wagner actively.
Objection.
All right, the basis of your objection
Judge, it's hearsay. She's present for a conversation. One is having on the phone with the other.
is, well, all right. I'm going to sustain the objection. I'm going to require some background or some kind of foundation for
Okay.
allowing her to testify about a phone conversation.
Okay. Ms. Rhoden, can you tell us, first of all, where were you when that conversation occurred?
It was Dana's house at the time. It was the trailer that was next to Chris's at the time of the murder. It would have been Frankie and Hazel Gilly's house.
Okay. So that's where Dana and Hanna and little Chris had lived prior to Frankie and prior to them getting their new home,
Yes, ma'am.
correct? Okay. And you were actually at that house at that time?
Yes.
And was this before or after Hanna had left Jake?
It was after she had left Jake.
And can you tell us what the discussion was?
Objection.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
What the discussion was?
I'm going to sustain the objection. Unless she could hear the other side of it, I don't know how she would know. A discussion, I think, is a two-party
Yeah.
situation.
So, Ms. Rhoden, who were you with at that time?
I was with Hannah Rhoden.
Okay, at her house at that time.
Yes, ma'am.
And who was on the other end of the phone?
Jake Wagner.
Well,
Well, I think there should be a basis for knowing that,
I
I
will.
guess. She can only say what she heard, so I'm going to sustain
Okay. How were you able to listen to this conversation?
Hannah had the phone on speakerphone. That way I could be witness to anything that was said.
Okay. And that was an intentional act on her part?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how do you know that it was Jake Wagner on the other end of the phone?
I've met Jake before. I've talked to Jake before. I mean, I know his voice.
And what was that discussion that you heard?
Objection.
that. Overruled.
The discussion was actually because Hannah had found out she was pregnant with Kylie, her youngest, and Jake had believed that Kylie was his, and we were trying to point out to him that she absolutely was not his, and that he couldn't be a part of her life.
Objection on this, Judge.
Overruled.
So both you and Hannah were telling him that this child was not his,
Yes, ma'am.
this child being Kylie?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And was there ever a time when you overheard a conversation in a similar manner regarding if Hannah would be allowed to parent if she left the Wagners?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection. Can we have a time frame?
Well, yeah, again, I think we're going to have a foundation for what thinks she heard, so I'll sustain the objection.
Was your answer yes or no on that?
Yes.
Objection, Judge.
So-
I
say-
simply asked if she ever heard a conversation
we have a time frame, please?
Well, all right. Heard a conversation, yes. I'm going to let that stand.
Okay.
Overruled the objection.
Can you tell us what time period would that have been? Again, was that before or after she had left Jake?
It was after she left Jake, before she got pregnant with Kylie.
Okay. And can you tell us where you were at that time?
We were at my home on Miller Lane in my room.
Okay. And once again, was this a conversation that you were able to hear because, was he on speakerphone?
Yes, ma'am, he was on speakerphone.
Okay. And did you recognize his voice and know that it was him?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what was that conversation?
Objection.
Overruled.
Jake Wagner had told Hannah that if she wanted to continue to be Sophia's mother, then they had to do it as a unit, as in she had to stay with him. If she left him, then she was leaving Sophia too.
And again, Ms. Rhoden, these conversations she was making you a witness to,
Yes, ma'am.
correct? On purpose?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did Hannah ever express fear of Jake or any of the other Wagners?
Objection, Judge. We have a time frame.
Well, yeah, I'll sustain the objection. I think it's a leading question.
Okay. Did Hannah ever express how she felt about the Wagners?
Objection, Judge.
Your Honor, I think if she says yes or no, then I can, if she says no, that's the end of the question. If she says yes, then I will ask her what the time frame is.
Well, I'll overrule the objection. Let her answer that.
Yes, she had expressed that she was fearful. It was after she had left Jake.
Okay. Okay, so after she left Jake, you already indicated that she became pregnant with somebody else's child, correct?
Correct.
And you've already testified that both you and her expressed to him that he was not the father.
Yes, ma'am.
And did you know who the father was?
Yes, ma'am. The father was Charlie Gilly.
Okay. And can you tell us approximately how long she was seeing Charlie Gilly?
I don't know approximately time frame.
Okay, like a month, a week?
Objection.
Well, she said she didn't know. I suppose if she has an estimate, you could ask her about that, but she didn't know the time period.
Okay. Did she start seeing somebody else after she saw Charlie Gilly?
Yes.
Okay. Why did she stop seeing Charlie Gilly?
She stopped seeing Charlie because he wasn't giving her the commitment that she needed, and he was continuing to use pain pills.
Okay. And did she start seeing somebody else at that point?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you, at the time that she started seeing that somebody else, did she yet know that she was pregnant?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And who was that other person?
Corey Holdren.
And can you tell us how long she dated him?
It was from the time that she left Charlie Gilly up until the time of her death.
Okay. And do you know if Corey Holdren also had a drug problem?
Yes, ma'am. He also used pain pills.
Okay. And did that change?
Yes, Hannah had helped him to get away from pain pills She helped him through withdrawal and to help him get clean.
And to your knowledge, did he do that?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was the nature of your relationship at that time with your cousin and friend, Hannah?
We were back to being the way we were as childhood friends. We were close. We were like sisters again.
Okay. Spending more time together?
Yes, ma'am. Every time we had a chance.
Okay. And at that time, did you also have a boyfriend?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And would the four of you spend time together?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was your understanding of the commitment that Corey was willing to make to Hannah's unborn child?
Objection, Judge.
Well, yeah, I think we have to have some kind of a foundation for anything like that.
Did you know the commitment that Corey had made to Hannah's unborn child?
Yes, Charlie had chosen to be the father, knowing that,
Charlie or Corey?
Corey had chosen to be the father, even though knowing that biologically Kylie would be Charlie Gillies.
And do you recall when Kylie was born?
I recall when she was born. I was not there when she was physically born. I was at work.
Okay. And did you eventually see Kylie?
Yes, ma'am, the next day.
Okay. And where did you see Kylie?
At the hospital,
Okay.
SOMC. It was SOMC hospital.
Okay. And was anybody else there while you were there?
April Manley was there, Hannah was there, Corey was there, and my ex-boyfriend, or my boyfriend at the time, James Preston.
Did Jake Wagner ever come there while you were there?
Not while I was there.
Okay. Did you learn that he was saying that still that Kylie was his?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection.
I have to sustain that. We got to have some basis for any of this knowledge that she testified.
Okay. Was that a conversation that you heard, or were you told that by somebody?
Objection, Judge.
I'm just asking if it was a first-hand observation. If it's not, then she can't testify to it.
Objection, Judge.
Well, it's kind of in reverse order. We're letting her say something and then ask her how she knows it. So I'm going to sustain the objection. I think we need to go at it
Okay.
another way.
Did you hear Jake say that or not?
I did not physically hear him say that.
Okay. After Kylie was born, I'm going to take you to the night before the murders, April 21st of 2016. Do you remember that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And on that day, did you spend some time with Hanna May and Kylie and Corey and your then boyfriend?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And can you tell us what activity did you guys do?
We went fishing that day.
Okay. And do you remember where you went fishing?
It's a little pond off of Pike Hill in Piketon, Ohio.
Okay. And can you tell us approximately what time you went fishing that day?
I don't know an approximate time.
Okay. And do you remember how late you were fishing?
We had fished for a couple hours. I know it was evening time.
Okay. Was it light or dark or?
We left when it started getting dark.
Okay. And for those few hours while you were fishing, did somebody else watch Kyle?
It was Corey Holdren's sister, Nikki, and her wife.
Okay. And what was the plan for after you guys went fishing?
My ex-boyfriend and I were going to go to Hannah's house and stay there for the night with her and Corey.
Did that happen?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
My boyfriend at the time had gotten a toothache. We had went back to get some oral gel for his toothache, and because I had actually called off work that day to spend time with Hannah, I had gotten a message from a family friend, Brandy. She had asked me to watch her kids so her and her husband could go out for the night. It was only supposed to be for a couple hours, so I said yes, and then I was going to go over there afterwards.
Did it end up being just for a couple of hours?
No, ma'am. It actually ended up being until the following morning, around about 7 a.m.
Okay. And where did you go to them or did they bring the children to you?
I had went to Brandy's house.
Okay. And when you left there, where did you go?
I went to my mother's house on Miller Lane.
At what point did you learn that something had happened?
I had went back, I went to sleep, and my boyfriend at the time had woke me up around 8:30. We had missed a phone call from a family friend, Nicole Francis, that had said that my uncle, Chris Sr., had been shot. She had heard it on a police radio. So I called her back, and at that point she had told me that Chris had been shot. I tried to call Hannah. I couldn't get a hold of Hannah. I couldn't get a hold of anybody. So my brother and I, his girlfriend and my ex-boyfriend, we drove to Union Hill, in which we were stopped just before Frankie's driveway.
Okay. Stopped by whom?
The sheriffs that were there.
At the time that you got that call, was the only information you had was that Chris Sr. had been shot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. At what point did you learn differently?
At some point, my brother, Luke Rhoden, had obtained some information from one of the sheriffs that Hannah had also been shot, in which he had come and told me that she had been shot as well, and she was dead.
What did you do at that point?
I became very upset. I couldn't believe that she had also been shot. I cried. There was a few of us that had actually tried to push past the sheriffs there. Of course, that didn't work out. One of my cousins, I believe, was actually arrested.
Just wanting to get.
Yeah, just wanting to get in to see what was going on, to check on everybody.
At some point, did you leave from the, I guess if you could tell us about how many family members were there at that side and what side were you on?
We were on Union Hill Road, the entrance, like if you were, it was just before Frankie's house, so we didn't come in directly up the highway. We came off of 772. And I'm not sure exactly how many of the family members were there. Most of us were there. Corey was not there yet, but he came later, just before we were pushed back to the curve there on on Union Hill Road. But I'm not sure exactly who all or how many people were there.
Okay. At some point, did you leave from that location?
Yes, ma'am. We were told to go up to the Union Hill Church on the other side of Union Hill.
And what was going on there?
They were trying to keep all the family together. That way, in case anybody needed to be questioned, and until they knew exactly what was going on.
Okay. And did they also share information out to the family that was gathered there?
Yes, later that night.
So you know that, or you've been told that Chris Sr. has been shot. You learned that Hannah also has been shot. Do you learn other individuals too?
Yes, at that point, once we had gotten up to the church, I had found out that Hannah Hazel had also been shot and was dead. Later, we also found out about Christopher and Frankie.
When you get to the church, do you do anything or make any phone calls or attempt to contact anyone?
I had tried to reach out to my father. It was actually before we got to the church because he was supposed to be at work. We had believed at the time he was still at work. And anytime I called my dad, if he didn't answer, he'd call me back on his lunch break, which would have been at noon. I called and I left him a message telling him that he needed to call me, that his brother had been shot. And when 12 o'clock had come around and he hadn't called me back, my brother, Luke Rhoden, and cousin Donald Stone had went to his residency to check in.
And at what point do you learn?
My Aunt Michelle had later got a text because none of us had service, and she became frantic and screamed out that my father was dead.
You were still at the church at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you stay at the church?
Upon learning that my father had been killed as well, I walked down the hill there until a family friend had actually picked me up. Her name was Melissa. And I told her that I just needed to get across the highway. She took me across the highway and I got out. There was a statey there that stopped me. I was trying to get to Hannah because I just wanted to be with her.
And what did you do then?
I was crying, and the statey, I had dropped to the ground. The statey helped me get back up, and in the car, Melissa took me back to the church.
And Ms. Rhoden, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your dad's house and the house of the other victims, okay?
Okay.
First of all, can you tell us, if your dad left his residence, would he lock it?
Yes, the house, he lived in a camper, and it didn't have an actual physical lock on it. He had installed a padlock. If he left his residency, then he would padlock it shut.
Okay. If he was inside his home, would it be locked?
No, ma'am, there was not a lock to lock it, and he didn't feel there was a reason to lock it if he was inside.
Okay. Did your dad own weapons?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know where he kept those weapons?
He had multiple guns in his camper. He slept with a gun, and he had one in his personal truck.
Did he also have a dog?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was that dog's name?
Brownie.
And when he was not at home, where would Brownie be?
Brownie would stay outside. You would frequently see her under the decks. That's kind of where she went to either stay cool or warm.
And there was also a dog house out there?
Yes,
too,
ma'am.
Correct, okay. And if your dad was home, where would Brownie be?
Brownie would be inside with him.
Okay. Talk to me about, first of all, was there also a sensor, a driveway sensor at the kind of entryway to his property?
Yes, ma'am. It would alarm if a vehicle crossed it.
Okay. And where would that make a sound?
Inside the camper.
Can you tell us, did you know your dad's sleeping and working habits at that time? Where was he working at that time?
I'm not sure the name of the company, but he was driving back and forth to Columbus for work.
And did you know approximately what time he would leave from his home, etc.?
He was usually out the door by 4 a.m.
Okay. And where would he go from there?
He would sometimes stop by Chris's in case he needed to get a shower, and then he would head off to work.
Okay. Were there days that he didn't need to shower in the morning? For instance, if he had had a shower the night before or something, and that he wouldn't get up quite that early to get to work? Or do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. Can you tell us if your dad was a heavy or a light sleeper?
It would depend on if he took his blood pressure medication. If he did not take his blood pressure medication, then he was a light sleeper. If he took the blood pressure medication, he was a heavier sleeper.
Okay. And you've had personal experience with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Were you also aware whether there were cameras on your dad's property?
Yes, ma'am. He had multiple. Yes, ma'am. He had multiple different cameras, trail cameras.
Okay. And how do you know that?
He had showed me the cameras, and he also had it set up to where it would send the information to his phone, in which he would send me pictures of deer and whatnot had walked through there.
Ms. Rhoden, were you also aware that your father had marijuana on that property?
Yes, ma'am.
And how were you aware of that?
My dad liked to brag about his marijuana, and there were actually a couple times that I had purchased marijuana from my father for myself and my boyfriend at the time.
Okay. And so you would buy some from your father
Yes, ma'am.
in an amount for personal use or something bigger?
Amount for personal use.
Okay. Did your dad have an opinion as to whether or not you should be smoking marijuana?
My father did not approve. We didn't acknowledge that I smoked. Anytime I was to purchase it, I had to specify that it was for my boyfriend at the time, Jimmy.
Were you involved at all with anything relating to the marijuana other than the times that you would purchase those small amounts from your father?
No, ma'am.
Taking you to Frankie's house, were you aware as to whether or not they locked their doors, Frankie and Hannah Hazel?
Yes, Frankie and Hannah Hazel locked their door. Hannah Hazel was more paranoid. They began locking their door more so after Hannah Hazel had discovered that there was a marijuana business
Okay.
at Chris's house.
And that was different than before she lived there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And can you tell us, as far as your uncle Chris went, did he have a habit of locking his door or not?
No, my Uncle Chris typically did not lock his door, whether he's inside or if he was gone.
Okay. Were you aware that he had cameras on his property?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what about the newer residence that Dana and Hannah and little Chris lived at?
I am not aware if there were cameras at the new house.
Okay. And what about the locking of those doors? Do
There,
you know?
Dana and Hannah were very adamant about locking the doors. If they were inside, they were locked. If they were gone, they were locked.
Did you go to the funerals for, I guess, the 6 at one time, right?
Yes.
While you were there, do you recall seeing any of the Wagners there?
Billy Wagner was present. George Wagner was present, and so was Jake Wagner.
Did you have any interaction with them?
I had spoke with Jake Wagner temporarily.
Can you talk to us about the dynamics of, well, let me first ask you. How many times would you say you were around the Wagner family as a whole?
I don't know approximately how many times, but there was definitely more than once.
Okay. And can you tell us what the family dynamics were, per your observation?
Objection.
Well, I'm going to overrule the objection, let her answer the question.
They would frequently be together. Typically, they would decide things together as a whole.
These were based on your observations?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Were you aware of the custody dispute that developed between Jake Wagner and Hanna
Yes,
May?
ma'am. Hannah Rhoden had made me aware of it.
Say it again.
Yes, Hannah Rhoden had made me aware of the dispute, custody dispute.
You're objecting to that,
Hearsay.
and I'm going to sustain that and direct the jury to disregard. She could tell what she personally observed, but not what she was told.
Okay. Did you observe anything that led you to that conclusion, other than what you were told?
I observed that Chris Sr., Chris Rhoden, had been trying to get a good lawyer just in case they had went to court.
Objection.
I'll sustain that. I think we're going to have a foundation for some of this, how she has this knowledge.
Okay. First of all, if we can focus on, during what time period would that have been?
It was before Hannah Rhoden had Kylie.
Okay. But she was pregnant with Kylie?
Yes,
At the
ma'am.
time? Okay. And you already testified that there were some conversations that she made you a witness for, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that she recorded some conversations, again, to document them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you know why that was?
in case they went to court for custody.
Objection to that,
Sorry.
Judge. Objection to that,
I'm going to sustain the objection and direct the jury to disregard. I think we'd be better off if we have the question asked and then the answer given, with starting with what this witness has observed, what she personally has heard, that kind of thing, rather than do it the other way. She's making statements of knowledge that there's no basis for at this point. So she can testify what she saw, what she personally observed, but not what somebody has told her.
Okay. Was there a time, any conversations that you overheard that Jake was a part of, where there was a discussion of what Hannah could and couldn't do in regards to Corey, for instance, being in her life?
And that's a yes or no question.
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell us when that conversation occurred?
It occurred when she was pregnant with Kylie.
Okay. And how do you know that conversation occurred?
It was a phone conversation where the phone was on speaker.
And were you present during that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what did you hear?
Josh.
Overruled.
Jake Wagner had told Hannah, while I was on the phone listening, that he did not want Sophia around Corey. He did not want her around those things, and that if she was, then Hannah was not going to be a part of her life, that he would take Sophia away.
Ms. Rhoden, did you cooperate with the Bureau of Criminal Investigations during their investigation and agreed to be interviewed and also to turn over your phones to be examined or extracted in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And you actually had more than one phone, correct, that you provided?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell us about that.
I have a tendency to save all of my text messages, phone calls, and emails, just as a precaution in case I ever need them.
Okay. And so you provided all the phones that you had, at least a few phones, 2 or 3?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Ms. Rhoden, were you also aware that Chris had marijuana on his property?
Yes, ma'am.
And how were you aware of that?
Chris had talked about there being some, and he would go out to the garage area. It was actually kept in an upstairs of the backside of the garage. He would go out there to conduct business with others, such as Billy Wagner.
Okay. And tell me about that. This was, Billy Wagner would be at Chris Sr.'s house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And where would you be, and if you could help us understand the time period that you're talking about?
This was prior to Sophia being born. They would go by the garage, and Chris Sr. would send Hannah and I inside the house, away from where they were doing business.
Okay. And when you say doing business, was that the language that was used? Or is
Yes,
that-
ma'am.
Okay. They would send you inside, so would you necessarily see or know what was going on?
No.
Okay. Ms. Rhoden, did you become aware that, or do you know if Jake Wagner set up a crib for Hanna May?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you know when that would have been?
It was just before Kylie was born, after Dana and Hannah had moved to their new house.
Okay. And to your knowledge, had she attempted to get it prior to moving to the new location?
Yes, ma'am.
But had been unable to do so?
Correct.
Are you aware of a time when Chris Sr. got injured by someone named Rick?
Yes, ma'am.
And tell us what you know about that.
Chris Sr. was hit in the head with a 2x4 by a man named Rick. He was hospitalized, in which Hannah Rhoden had stayed with him while he was hospitalized, and then whenever he was discharged home.
Okay. And do you know the extent of his injuries?
I know that he had obtained a head injury, but I'm not sure to what extent.
Okay. And did you become aware that your father visited that individual that had harmed Chris?
It was said that my father had visited him.
Okay. And do you know if anybody accompanied him?
I am unsure if anybody accompanied.
Okay. You weren't present for that?
Correct.
Okay. Were you aware of whether or not Chris had firearms?
Yes, ma'am. He had multiple guns.
Okay. And what about Frankie? Did he have any weapons in his home?
Yes, ma'am. He kept a shotgun by his bedroom door.
Okay. And what about Dana?
Dana had a small handgun that she kept. Hannah did not have a gun that she owned.
Did you share with investigators your opinion as to why your father would have been killed if Chris had been killed?
Yes, ma'am.
Your basis for your objection is,
It's an opinion.
I'm sorry?
I believe the prosecutor's asking for this witness's opinion rather than facts.
Well, yeah, she asked whether she had shared an opinion with the investigators. I'm not sure of the relevance of that, what
Okay.
her opinion would be, so I'm going to sustain that.
Okay. Can you tell us if your dad had a reputation of being protective of Chris?
Yes, ma'am. My father was very protective.
And not just of Chris?
No, ma'am. The whole family.
Okay. Did you ever go hunting with Hannah?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Who would you go hunting with You and Hannah, and who else?
It would typically be me, Hannah, my Uncle Chris, and my father, and occasionally Christopher.
Okay. Did you ever go hunting with either Jake Wagner or George Wagner, or at a time when they were along?
No, we never went hunting.
Okay. Did you ever do anything else together?
We went to Raritan Whitetail Deer Festival where there was a bow contest,
A what contest?
a bow shooting contest.
Okay. And did you guys participate or just observe?
I was an observer.
Okay. Who were the participants?
George Wagner, Jake Wagner, Billy Wagner, and Hannah.
After the homicides, did you attempt to maintain contact with any of the Wagners?
Yes, I maintained contact with Jake Wagner.
Okay, and why did you do that?
So I could check in on Sophia, Hannah Rhoden's oldest daughter.
Okay. And she was with him?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And were you able to see Sophia?
Yes, I was allowed to see her once.
Tell me about that time.
My sister and I went to Peterson Road, the Wagners' home, and we saw Bullvine, George's son, and seen Sophia. Jake stayed in the area. We stayed outside, and Angela Wagner stayed inside the premises, but kind of lingered around just to kind of keep an eye on everything.
Okay. Was that the only time that you were permitted to see Sophia?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us if there was a time when, after the homicides, that Jake got upset with you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. That he texted you when he was upset, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And Ms. Rhoden, do you recall the last day that you spent with Hanna May?
Yes.
Did she have Sophia?
No.
And why did she not have Sophia?
Jake Wagner.
All right. I think we're going to have a basis for that knowledge, if she
Okay.
indicates she has knowledge of something.
Okay.
So I'll sustain the objection at this time.
How do you know why she did not have Sophia?
Text messages on Hannah's phone.
Okay. Were those things that you saw yourself?
Yes, ma'am.
And who were the text messages from?
The text messages were between Hannah Rhoden and Jake Wagner.
And what did they say?
Objection.
Basis is,
Again, it's hearsay, Judge.
Your Honor,
The
this is,
content is hearsay.
This is-
I'll overrule the objection.
thank you.
The text was from Jake Wagner to Hannah, stating that he was offering to keep Sophia for a couple extra days so she could recover after having Kylie.
I have no other questions of this witness, Your Honor.
The defense may cross-examine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you a few questions just for clarification of the answers that you've already given, okay?
Okay.
I believe, just to get started, you had testified that you cooperated with the BCI agents who were investigating this case.
Yes.
And so I'm going to refer some to that information which you provided to those agents, okay?
Okay.
But before I get to that, you were asked a question. I just wanted to clarify. You were asked about the habit or routine of Dana and locking doors. Do you recall that question?
The one that was asked here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And so if I understood it, you were asked whether you had knowledge whether Dana kept her doors locked. Is that right?
Here, yes.
And what was your answer to that?
The door stayed locked whenever they were there or if they were gone.
Okay, so assuming they're asleep at night, those doors are going to be locked.
Yes.
Okay. And you had testified to an occasion where you had went to Peterson and you saw the children there, right?
Yes.
George was not there though, right?
No.
Okay. And now, referring to the information which you had provided previously to law enforcement, you had given information about an individual you know as Big Mike, is that right?
Yes.
And Big Mike is someone who is from the Cincinnati area?
To my knowledge.
Okay, that's information that you had given agents though, right?
That I had heard from my father.
Okay, all right. And Big Mike was someone
Your
who...
Honor, I'm going to object, as I believe he's eliciting hearsay at this point.
All right. Well, let me rephrase the question
All
here.
right. Sustain the objection, rephrase.
You were asked about drug dealing with your family's involvement with drug dealing, right?
Your Honor. Okay.
You were asked that question?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'm eventually going to ask you about Big Mike. You're aware of Big Mike's race, is that right?
Your Honor, again, I'd like him to lay a foundation.
It's what? I'm sorry.
I would like him to lay a foundation. I already asked Ms. Rhoden if she was ever involved.
Well,
in it.
the source of her knowledge, I think, would be important at this point.
Sure. Okay. Did you ever observe an African-American male with Chris Sr. or your father?
Not that I recall.
Okay. And so any information you would have given is based on hearsay. Is that what you're telling me?
With Big Mike.
About an African-American male? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, so let me then ask you about, you know where Big Bear Lake is, right?
Yes.
And you have visited there.
Yes.
And you were there on an occasion that Chris Sr. was there.
Yes.
And on at least one occasion, you were there when Chris Sr. was there talking to Robin Waddell.
Yes.
And who was Robin Waddell?
A family friend.
Okay. And you overheard a discussion they were having, right?
Again, I would object if he's attempting to elicit the contents of that discussion.
Well, we haven't got around to it yet. Let me first ask, you heard a conversation between Chris Sr. and Robin, is that right?
I had.
Okay. And that conversation, before we get to the content of it, dealt with illegal or drug trafficking, is that right?
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object because that is the content, apparently.
Well, we haven't got to it yet, but we can get to specifics.
Well, I think you are getting to it. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay. Do you have personal knowledge of Chris Sr. preparing to buy a building for a pill mill?
No.
Okay. Do you remember providing that
Your
information?
Honor, again,
I'm sorry.
you can ask if she has any personal knowledge.
Well, I'm going to overrule that. If you're asking her about information that she has provided, then I'll grant you.
Okay. Do you remember providing that information to agents?
I provided it based on hearsay.
Okay. You were also asked about Billy Wagner by agents, right?
Yes.
You described the relationship between Chris Sr. and Billy Wagner as business associates.
Yes.
Okay. You were also asked on your direct examination of dogs, and your father had a dog named, what was that dog's name?
Brownie.
Brownie. And you are familiar with Brownie, right?
Yes.
And you're familiar with Brownie's aggression towards people that dog does not know, is that right?
Correct.
And how is that dog's disposition towards people he doesn't know?
Aggressive.
Right. And Chris Sr., you're aware he has a dog, right?
Yes, he had a dog.
Named Chance?
Yes.
And that dog was similar, that it was very aggressive to people it did not know.
Yes.
And you provided that information to agents.
Yes.
You testified on direct examination regarding Chris's involvement in marijuana trafficking. You recall those questions, right?
Not specifically.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you. You're aware of Chris Sr.'s involvement with marijuana trafficking, right?
Yes.
And you're aware that he was engaged in more than just marijuana trafficking?
Not firsthand knowledge.
Just have one moment, Your Honor. You would agree with me, though, that you at least told BCI agents about more than
Your
marijuana?
Honor, I'm going to object, because she also told them a lot of things that Hannah said to her.
Objection.
Well, I'm going to overrule the objection and let the question be asked.
You had told BCI agents about more than just marijuana trafficking, right?
Yes, based on what I heard.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Does the state wish to redirect?
No, Your Honor.
You might step down. All right. At this point, we'll take a 15-minute recess.